Gallant Venture War Room. Several hours ago. Maximilian, the roaring thunder Usarek was quietly staring at the tactical map as he quietly stirred a cup in his hand. The beverage had long since turned lukewarm, but he had no intentions of drinking it. He just needed something to occupy his hands as the mounting anticipation and dread coiled around his stomach. Taking a quick glance to his left, he found Javier Wunder focused on a datapad. Next to him, Casimir Caiston was muttering quietly, too low even for him to hear more than gibberish. Interestingly, the young Caiston had his eyes focused on the tactical map too. Finally, to his right, sat Felicity Centaur. What a sight to behold, he thought with amusement. Centaurs, he'd come to learn quickly, were, for the most part, morally flexible, charismatic, manipulative, and always in control of their feelings and actions. But they also tended to be arrogant, self-righteous, and insufferable to a fault as they proclaimed how much better they were than others through actions and deeds. But when they were knocked out of their cushy thrones, they showed just how fragile their egos really were. Felicity Centaur's downfall was a prime example. Outwardly, there was nothing wrong. She was as beautiful and collected as ever, a symbol of the power and standing of House Centaur. But her little mannerisms, the way she constantly fiddled with her fingers, how her eyes darted around the room, and the heavy air surrounding her betrayed her at every waking moment. Regardless of the morbid satisfaction he was experiencing, his focus remained on the tactical map. "How did they do it?" he asked rhetorically. Try as he may, he couldn't comprehend how, in Julius's name, had the Samuel's glory arrived in the system without alerting the Drazen. Worse yet, when had they entered? The probes that were dispatched at his behest alerted the Drazen immediately, and they cleverly dispatched some of their forces, 2 destroyers, as a quick response task force that could either engage the enemy or move to join the rest of their fleet with only a few hours of difference. So how had Redford Kalen arrived in Hastrung without alerting the aliens? It was a question that plagued his mind with no answer in sight. While the sensors and eyes of the probes were limited, they had seen what had transpired no more than 10 minutes ago. It had been a cunning and well-performed strike, he had to admit. Redford Kalen had managed to lure out some Drazen ships with decoy detonations, only to then pounce on the unsuspecting enemy, killing them in mere instants. Simultaneously, however, an assault over the planet that once held the name Hago proudly rendered the monstrosity that could only be a cattle ship useless. Again, he was left pondering how Redford Kalen had achieved such a feat. He had definitely used tactical and haywire mines to great effect, but his fighters, a full wing, had engaged the wounded vessels of the Drazen and the captured shipyard. It only took him a few minutes to answer that question. The honored veteran had managed to attach the mines to small hordes of missiles, carrying them through space outside regular sensor range and flying quietly until it was time to strike. And what a masterful strike it had been. His heart leaped with joy when the fighters began their well-coordinated assault at the same time Redford engaged with the destroyer and the 2 measly frigates. Moments later, the barrage arrived, crippling the cattle ship, but not before the Drazen were able to respond to their assault in kind. The last thing the probes were able to detect before the jamming caused by the Drazen created an enormous bubble that prevented them from seeing what was happening inside it, was the wing being chased by 4 frigates and 400 Drazen fighters, and the 2 destroyers breaking their patrol to rejoin their fleet. Now all they could do was wait for a result and think about their next step carefully. "We must jump into the system and ensure that wicked wench and her black-clad trickster are dead," Felicity said all of a sudden, her left eye twitching slightly with anger. There it is, the shattered ego. What caused this, I wonder, thought Maximilian as he turned a quizzical gaze upon her. For a measured woman, you sound incredibly bloodthirsty right now, Felicity. Are you planning to plunge a dagger into the heart of the princess yourself? If I must, then I shall. But I will be satisfied with her demise, replied Felicity, glaring at the map. Judging by your tone, I take it you don't approve of my demand? You're correct. I don't approve. What you're proposing is ludicrous at best and a petty suicide attempt at worst. What has got you so worked up? I've never seen you so upset before. Maximilian chose his words carefully, trying not to incite her rage upon him. She was his superior, after all. "We were tricked!" Felicity spat venomously. "I was tricked! That trickster man! He seems innocent, dull, and foolish, but he's a terrible predator who stalks for prey in plain sight. I thought I was the one who manipulated him, but in turn it was I whose strings were pulled like those of a puppet." "Wouldn't that mean the Reaper is the one truly responsible for the deceit you suffered?" Maximilian asked, silently enjoying watching Felicity squirm on her seat in a way she thought she retained her calm, collected aura. It didn't. Of course she was the puppeteer, but that man, this Wyatt Staples, he lied to my face as easily as breathing and pointed me into a pre-prepared path set by that slaughterer of houses. I thought him honest, when in reality I was in the presence of a masked unknown. Everything involving him is a mystery. "Didn't you say that he was a simpleton and a commoner?" Javier asked, setting down his data pad. "That we had nothing to worry about? While you were being distracted by this battle, I did your job for you, Felicity, and ran several numbers and simulations. I was afraid there was foul play at work within the deal struck with House Ferrantes, but no, there was none. The deal is solid and straightforward. The costs lie within acceptable margins. There are no loopholes to be exploited within our diplomatic privileges, and the shortfall of available food at low prices will impact our enemy's supply lines in the short to mid-term." His eyes narrowed dangerously. "And that's the problem." "Ah," Maximilian exclaimed deeply, "now it makes sense. We played right into the Reaper's designs, didn't we? However, why would she allow us to take a deal that is beneficial to our cause? Because there is another greater prize to be had. If she succeeds, Ginoc could annul our deal and give the prince a much better one. In the worst-case scenario, he could support the prince, joining his forces entirely. I dare not assume what her real goal is. Not after our debacle," Javier added. "Most likely I'm entirely in the wrong, and the deal struck is something else we have yet to see. We achieved victory over the Reaper, this is a fact. But it is clear now that such victory was given to us from the start. Felicity is right. We were tricked and deluded by what we assumed to be a mere elevated commoner. That you believe talent is exclusive to noble blood is not entirely surprising. Naturally, talented people can spring from anywhere. Nothing assures us that Wyatt Staples is more than meets the eye. But I will not deny that there is a high probability that he is a peculiar agent or unique confidant valued highly by House Astor," Maximilian replied, eyes narrowing. Felicity brought a fist down to the table. "It matters little now. We must act." "If we jump now," Maximilian began, "the destroyers will take notice and move to intercept us. Our fleet isn't built for a straight fight against those monsters. We could take them down, but it would cost us, Felicity. The Gallant Venture is a step above a light destroyer in terms of firepower, but if Redford fails to take the Drazen down, we could very well face a potent force that could obliterate us." "Then you suggest we remain here doing nothing like cowards? Where's your honor as a warrior, Roaring Thunder?" Felicity countered. "There's a difference between being a warrior and a mindless fool who charges at the enemy at the first chance that arises," replied the lone wolf wisely, much to Felicity's chagrin. "What say you, little Caiston? You've been immersed in your thoughts so far. Is your mind a better company?" Casimir stopped his muttering, hummed deeply, and then crossed his arms. "It should be, around 8 hours. "Excuse me?" Javier asked, perplexed. "The Samuel's Glory should take around 8 hours before it is in range of the cattle ship and the Drazen fleet. They destroyed 3 ships here," he said, highlighting the debris field where the short-lived ambush took place. "And if my calculations are correct, the only 2 possible vectors to take would be shadowing the 5th planet's gravity well for an effective alpha strike, or move through an upward vector, repeating the assault. If I were Redford Kalen, I'd opt for the former route. No doubt the Drazen would now expect a similar assault to take place." Maximilian let out a loud, barking laugh. "You surprise me, little Caiston. It seems you've studied well." "My father has invested much in my education," Casimir replied nonchalantly. "I may not enjoy the idea of taking a life with my own hands, but I'm more than capable of commanding troops and forming plans of assault and battle strategies." "And what, pray tell, can we do with your incredible talents of deduction and planning, Casimir?" Felicity asked, not bothering to hide her mounting annoyance. It means we have a window of opportunity to act, Casimir said, and the map zoomed to the jamming bubble. We won't know what's happening there until either the cruisers are destroyed or the Samuel's glory is undone. We can wait until the destroyers enter the jamming's effective range before we jump. Our arrival cannot be hidden, for I know not what sort of technology or means the princess used to arrive unnoticed. However, thanks to the jamming bubble, there's a high possibility that they won't be able to detect our war entry signatures. With our stealth capabilities, we can move closer unnoticed. If they detect and move to engage us, then we can jump back out. But should we? Javier asked, concerned. Why should we put ourselves in such unnecessary risk? Because we don't know what the outcome of their engagement will be, Maximilian answered. It is unlikely that the Samuel's glory will come unscathed from facing such a strong force. The princess clearly wants a quick victory. If it were up to me, I'd make use of hit-and-run strikes, slowly chipping away at the Drazen's strength ship by ship. But that could take days or weeks, he chuckled darkly. Taking the current royal dispute, I can't blame Princess Clara Astor for her expeditious desires. Luckily for her, Redford Kalen is one of the few I can see achieving victory against such odds. Correct me if I'm mistaken, Uzerek, but your constant praise of that man leads me to believe that you admire him, Javier said with a sneer. That's because, Wunder, I do. He's one of the few gold aces across the Principality. With only a single mark left to ascend to platinum, I might add, a talented pilot, and one of the most competent commanders there is. I've always wondered why he never became a lone wolf or rose past his current rank. He could have become a fleet admiral rather easily, yet he chose otherwise, Maximilian explained before letting out a sad sigh. Pity that he's sitting on the captain's chair. Otherwise, I would have enjoyed facing him in open combat from within matching cockpits. And prove that you're superior, Felicity added, to which Maximilian didn't refute. When can we jump into the system, Casimir? In 3 or 4 hours. We can then decide if we want to approach or stay at the edge of the system, Casimir replied. If we go in and decide to engage a crippled Samuel's glory, what would be our chances of success? Felicity asked. Casimir hummed deeply, and his eyes faintly flowed for nearly an entire minute before he gave his answer. If the Samuel's glory is crippled or heavily damaged, then our chances will be effectively increased. It will depend highly on the damage it received during the battle against the Drazen, and, more importantly, how much heat it generates. Ideally, it will be so damaged that it won't be able to move, or they'll be running so hot that fighting back would mean sacrificing everyone on board. I wouldn't count on it, but they are possibilities. If by some miracle the Samuel's glory is nearly unscathed, then our only option will be to run. What of their wing? Javier questioned. Put against what was pursuing them. I'd be surprised if more than 10 survive that after they scatter, Maximilian replied. We can count their fighter strength as destroyed. To her credit, Felicity paused for a moment and pinched her chin, thinking deeply for several seconds. If we decide to engage, how long would it take us before we reach Hago and their position? After we jump, if we stay put, 16 to 20 hours at full burn, though that would almost certainly give us away the second we enter their sensor range, which is, I must remind you, thrice as potent as ours is. Hastrung is relatively small, so that plays in our favor. If we start heading in at half capacity, that could shorten our travel time to 10 to 14 hours after engaging full burn. He paused for a moment, then frowned. But there's something I simply cannot understand. And that is? Javier asked, almost rolling his eyes. Casimir pointed at the map, and the dot representing the cattle ship blinked. Why didn't they destroy the cattle ship with that strike? They could have targeted its engines to reach its reactors instead of crippling it with haywire mines. Maximilian, what are your thoughts on this matter? For the cattle, Maximilian replied dryly. A noble, if abundantly stupid, reason. That ship will be crawling with Drazen, so taking it through boarding actions is beyond sheer hubris. Even with Royal Marines and Cynthia Winfield leading the charge, I doubt they can carve through hundreds of thousands, possibly millions of those things. If I were them, I'd vent every section and let everything in it die. The cattle ship could yield vast rewards, who knows what secrets it could hold. The salvage value alone could justify the assault 10 times over, he said with a heavy chuckle. shaking his head. Never let it be said that the Princess Clara Astor, the dreaded Reaper, isn't ambitious. Perhaps too much for her own sake, Felicity growled contemptuously. So what are we to do? When shall we jump in? Already decided we're going to proceed, eh? Maximilian chastised, but Felicity ignored him. I say we jump now and save us the trouble. We're going to jump anyway, so what if the destroyers can see our arrival? Our stealth systems will render their attention obsolete, more so now that they have another foe to focus on, Javier proposed. I say we follow my plan of action and jump after the destroyers enter the jamming bubble, Casimir said, and Felicity nodded, supporting his decision. I think we should jump after the jamming stops, Maximilian proposed. Is it decided then? Felicity abruptly chanted. We will jump once the Drazen can't detect us, then we shall bring victory to the Lord Regent so that our shame may be expunged. The hammer of Draymore is strong. The hammer of Draymore is strong. Casimir and Javier followed. The hammer of Draymore is strong, said Maximilian less enthusiastically. 4 hours later, they jumped. Nornavio, bridge, present time, insanity, insanity, sheer insanity. That's the only word that came to Redford's mind after Wyatt finished explaining his idea. It wasn't a strategy, much less a tactical move, but an idea born out of hatred, creativity, and not a small amount of madness. He couldn't help himself. He smiled widely. Galt, ready port torpedo tube, but do not launch, Redford ordered. Sir, Galt replied instantly. Under other circumstances, he would have wondered why his commanding officer would ever issue such an order. But having the sensation that Wyatt was involved somehow pushed aside his doubts. Whatever was going to happen would either end up in success, which would see the coming swarm dealt with somehow, his preferred outcome, or it would end in failure, and then there wouldn't be any time to regret the decisions made, win or lose, victory or death. Tube loaded and open, sir. Awaiting your command. Splendid, Redford replied. Deploy our mining drones, all of them. Have them move to the front of the ship. Sir! Again, Galt obeyed, connecting with his companions and issuing the command. A dozen smaller ports opened at the bottom of the Nornavio, and a few dozen mining drones, a third the size of a regular Raptor fighter, were released until all 200 of them were accounted for. All mining drones released, sir. Redford nodded and focused on the coming swarm. They would be upon the Nornavio in mere minutes, so he had no time to second-guess himself. Through his sensors, he watched Wyatt and what remained of his wing preparing to launch an attack against the coming destroyers who had, puzzlingly, stopped firing missiles. Not only had they stopped firing, they were changing course. Wyatt, come in. Yes, Commander, Wyatt replied a second later. The destroyers are breaking off and it appears they are turning around. Could they be preparing to counter your assault? Redford asked, unsure. I know not, Commander. If they were, why would they give us a clear shot at their engines? They could be preparing for a trap, Wyatt proposed. But his confidence was null. They wouldn't abandon their cattle ship. Redford agreed. The other ships had given him a true battle and were suicidal in their efforts to stop him. But he couldn't spare any more time thinking about it. Not now. He could handle the destroyers later. He had to focus on what was coming to kill them all. Change of plans, Wyatt. Form up around the Nornavio and be ready to provide support. If your plan works but some of them survive, we'll need to move quickly and mop the stragglers. If it fails, then I'll entrust the safety of Her Highness to you. Commander? Wyatt asked, concerned. I've ordered Cynthia to take her to a shuttle. If the end is inevitable, I'll ensure she survives and escapes. The Nornavio has suffered significant damage, and we won't be able to outrun that swarm in our current state. The window given to us by the destroyers offers us some breathing room, but nothing more than that. If we fail, ensure she returns to the prince's side. This is not a request, but an order. Understood, Lieutenant? There was a moment of silence that felt eternal. Then came the reply. For the Principality, Commander. For the Principality, Redford replied, content. Killing the link, he set his mind on his duty. Galt, I want you to ease the torpedo out with small bursts. His command given, he watched and felt the torpedo slowly and meticulously leaving its tube until half of it was out. Extending his link to every drone and aided by his bridge officers, the mining drones landed across the surface of the torpedo. The drones were boxy, ugly things equipped with a compact but powerful core in its center, a small thruster at the back, a large mining lens at the front, and 8 dexterous arms, 4 protruding to the back and 4 to the front, so it could maneuver across the surfaces of asteroids, small moons, and other celestial objects as it mined for precious resources. Or, as was the case this time, haul something around. With the combined power of all 200 drones, they were able to easily drag the torpedo out, and after a quick adjustment, they latched to its front with their rear arms, with most of them pointing their thrusters back, ready to haul it. The others had their lenses focused outwardly to space, ready to cut up anything stupid enough to get too close to them. "Target the gunships and the bombers. Full open barrage until we are at 10% missile ammunition," Redford ordered, and a moment later, his order was carried out. The missile pods opened fire, unleashing wave after wave of missiles. He watched with bated breath as the Drazen swarm wasted no time in firing intercepting missiles of their own, with the fighters moving to the front to protect their precious and deadly bombers. Once the explosions of tens of missiles began to erupt across his sensors and could be seen clearly through the exterior cameras, Redford activated the drones and they began to burn at the fullest of their capacity. The torpedoes were bulky, powerful things, especially the variety that was added to the Noir Navio. 30 meters in length and 6 in width, most of what made up the torpedo was centered around actually getting it to its target. It was equipped with fairly strong shields, most of its exterior was armor, and a miniature plasma reactor, and its payload, regardless of what it was, nuclear, plasma, or antimatter, was always deadly. Sadly, their lethality came at the cost of being expensive to make, easy to detect, and much, much slower than their smaller cousins, the missiles. And Wyatt Staples had circumvented the issue of an early detection with the use of mining drones, of all things, as he was inspired by an invention created by his youngest brother at some point in his childhood. Truly, insanity of the highest degree. But if it worked, he'd make sure to give him a proper reward. Thankful for that brief moment of relaxation, Redford watched as his missile barrage simply couldn't compete against the countermeasures launched by the Drazen fighters. It forced them to waste their missiles, but nothing more than that. Their numbers alone would tear them apart. A minute passed when suddenly he was alerted that the destroyers were now burning away. For a second he thought they were escaping, but a quick revision of their trajectory and vector dashed it away. They were going to face off against something he couldn't see, but that the Drazen obviously could. The remaining probes in the system told him nothing. "Traitors," he hissed, as the only option possible came to him. It was a given Felicity Cintor would show her hand at some point. He didn't expect her to already be in the system, however. It wasn't ideal, but thanks to her, he didn't have to worry about the 2 destroyers. He'll worry about whoever survived later. With a thought, the drones pushing the torpedo forth stopped, and using directional thrusters, put it into a rapid spin. Then, every drone turned its lenses to open space. To the Drazen, the torpedo would look more like a glob of drones sticking to the surface of a shuttle or other small craft. The barrage of missiles was never intended to stop the swarm or even slow it down. It was meant to keep them together and give them something to focus on, just to ignore the disguised torpedo until it was too late. And that time had come. "Activate the engine!" Redford ordered, and instantly the torpedo's thruster came to life, creating a vibrant plume. The Drazen took notice of it almost a second later. They fired missiles with the intent of shooting the, to them, unidentified object down. But that's when the drones, all at the same time, activated their lasers. As the torpedo spun, the lasers cut through missiles easily, detonating them or outright destroying them before they could even touch its shields. Fighters and gunships shoot it with heavy coilgun rounds, but they were either melted by a stray laser, impacted the shield, or torn a chunk out of a drone. Some missiles made it through and several drones were destroyed, but the shield held strong. The struggle between the 2 forces lasted half a minute before they tried to break their formation. But it was too late. The drones had done their job. Redford triggered the remote detonation and the void was yet again illuminated by a short-lived star, taking with it in a true blaze of rage and glory every gunship, every bomber, and nearly every fighter the Drazen had launched in desperation. When the intense ball of light made out of pure destruction faded, Redford observed as Wyatt and his fighters were already moving to destroy the stragglers, most of which were dead in space, drifting aimlessly, their electronics fried beyond repair. "Milcades, it's your turn," Redford said through the network. "Understood, Redford. Would you look at that? They were kind enough to give us an entry point." "Milcades out," replied the jovial, white-haired man. "Sir," Galt called out, "now that we're out of immediate danger, I'm receiving several requests to dispatch service droids and personnel to the affected areas. There are also several electrical problems causing many decks to become isolated with wounded still inside. We can't reach them from the outside without breaching equipment. Wait, Sergeant Salazar Reed informs me that several of our ex-pirate trainees are volunteering to either crawl through ducts or go EVA and enter through the damaged sections." "Why?" Redford asked sternly. "It seems the children and adolescents want to prove their worth to the shipmother, or whatever that means. Reed informs me it's a point of pride for them, like a ritual of passage. What's your answer, sir?" After thinking about it for half a second, Redford sighed. "Have personnel escort them or accompany them. We've had no further incidents ever since they began their classes, but I'm not willing to trust them that much yet. But if they can save lives by putting theirs on the line, I won't object." With a nod, Galt turned back to his console and passed on the approval. Redford scanned the area one more time as a long shuttle exited the Noirnavio's hangar and made its way toward the cattle ship. He examined the now numerous debris fields, the damage done to the Noirnavio, the numerous alerts, the crippled cattle ship half expecting another nasty surprise, and the space that but a few moments ago was filled with something that heralded their deaths and destruction. He chuckled softly to himself. Paradoxical insanity. Cattle ship. Eternal garden. How could this happen? How did mere feed manage to strike at them so brazenly? Their assault was unexpected at every conceivable level, but there was no doubt that the detestable feed that called themselves humans had tricked them. The evidence was now displayed across several debris fields that had been the ships of its brethren. "High Marshal, we're receiving a message from the Delight in Sunrise and the Unchallenged Incubator. They ask if they should turn and face the damaged black vessel?" asked the nearest communication officer. High Marshal Diffit turned its full attention to the officer, and its pedals quickly displayed its answer. "They'll continue to engage the smaller vessels. The humans of that dark vessel will try to board us. Have our engineers tended to our damaged electronics?" "Our engineers are doing what they can, but the damage we sustained during their initial assault has proven extensive. We are running on emergency power and secondary batteries. If they decide to strike us down, there is nothing we can do to stop them." To any other filthy animal, the display of their colored petals would transmit nothing. Lower life forms were simple creatures like that, devoid of higher functions of intellect and interpretation. Yet another point that made the Drazens superior was that they could transmit complex emotional messages through slightly different variations of the colors they could conjure and the barely perceptible movements of their petals. But to Diffit, the fear, anger, and trepidation were more than apparent in the officer's reply. "They won't. They want to capture the Eternal Garden for their own selfish and nefarious purposes. They will have us all killed before that," it replied, and paused for a moment, gathering its thoughts. "How many defenders, hunters, and skinners do we have on board?" "No more than 10,000, High Marshal," replied the officer. "Do we have the power to run our automated defenses?" "We do, High Marshal." Diffit shuffled where it stood, unwilling to take its pod of command during such a situation that required his undivided attention. Looking around the chamber, illuminated by a pleasant red light, it saw the rest of its kin working on their tasks. The fury in its hearts was hard to contain and only allowed itself to flail its vines around slowly, eager to carve the meat of the insolent feed who had dared attack and kill so many Drazan already. Its duty was to its siblings first. Rage could wait. "How are things progressing on the planet? Has the Lord Harrower managed to disengage the filthy apes?" Diffit asked. "A moment, High Marshal," the officer replied, turning to its circular panel and deftly using its surprisingly dexterous manipulators to tap quick commands. A few seconds later, it turned to Diffit, its colors showcasing grimace and fury. "High Marshal, The Lord Harrower is still unable to disengage any of its forces. The feed is pressing on all fronts and several pods have been overrun. Lord Harrower Cartagolgo has managed to establish itself in 3 major route holds, but access to the void-capable shuttles and transports is impossible. Diffit wanted to lash out in anger. Ever since the destruction of the undulating vine, Lord Harrower Cartagolgo, its dearest friend and superior, attempted to pull back and send as many defenders and hunters it could spare. But the damn humans, somehow sensing the retreat of such units and a de-escalation of the ongoing harvest, instead of running to hide like the stinking, filthy, delicious animals they were, like so many others had in a futile attempt to prevent them from being used by their betters. They pressed the attack on all fronts, pinning down Cartagolgo's troops and preventing the return of their veteran and trained personnel to the Eternal Garden. Diffit lamented at that moment the decision it made to transfer most of the troops at its disposal so the harvest and subjugation of the planet could be completed as fast as possible. That had left their fleet without the numbers to spare and send boarding actions against that accursed dark vessel. Then again, after seeing it in action, it doubted many, if any, boarding pods would have made it. Prepare kill zones and set traps. Take battle stations. We must prepare for anything the feed may send upon us, Diffit commanded. Order the caretakers to seal the nurseries. Dispatch our remaining skinners and defenders to the cattle farms. Take the young feed. Use them as shields. Humans are cruel to each other, but hold care for their delectable spawn. Orders dispatched, High Marshal, replied the officer. Suddenly, the quick shuffling of clawed paws caught their attention. Defeaty turned to see a kin wearing an engineering uniform. It was clearly agitated as its vines flailed wildly and its manipulators gripped each other nervously. High Marshal! Remain calm, sibling. What is it that you wish to communicate? Diffit asked, portraying a restraint it had not. That ship, the engineer replied, its pedals vibrating fearfully. The Great Bloom, before it was destroyed, sent an encoded transmission. It recognized the ship. It is the same ship that stopped the assault of High Marshal Kuitar set upon the system the humans called Jintrax. Diffit was unable to keep its vines from flaring, lashing out for several seconds as it processed the information. Of course it knew of Jintrax and the monstrous ship that foiled Kuitar's mission, in turn exposing the treachery of the human rebels. That same ship had come to hunt them down? Did the humans see them as prey? Mere feed? Pathetic. Preposterous. Humans were animals. They were all animals, some smarter than others, but animals at the end of the day. They were not predators, only pretenders and fakes, never like the glorious Drazen. It refused to believe that a so-called sapient species that wantonly killed each other at every chance it got for petty reasons could do something so predatory. Unleash our remaining craft, Diffit ordered, partly in desperation and partly in anger. We have no more qualified pilots, High Marshal. The remaining ones are untrained and untested, the officer replied. Diffit's tendrils went rigid and its manipulators turned to fists, shaking slightly. The officer was right. Sending untrained pilots would only get them killed for nothing. And after seeing the odd and, it had to admit, terrifying tactics and strategies deployed by the humans in their dark vessel, it wasn't confident about their chances of success. It could hardly believe when the surviving pilots of the patrol strike force returned. Who could believe such an obvious fabrication? Their retelling of how a smaller force undid them could not be anything more than blustering lies. But data and recordings did not lie. Despite their preparations and standing ready to fight, the surprise strike from the dark vessel threw the fleet into chaos for several moments, more than enough time for their enemy to puncture several of their ships with an opening barrage. They had done everything in their power to take it down, but the dark vessel never hesitated. It had been a brutal departure from the usual strategies and movements made by the Principality feed that none could adapt quickly enough to counter them effectively. Diffit could take solace in that its siblings had damaged the powerful dark vessel significantly, but nothing more than that. It wasn't crippled, but its capabilities were reduced with how much heat it had generated. Even if it ran away now, it wouldn't now that its allies had arrived. Its mysterious means of obscuring its presence was tarnished. High Marshal, I'm detecting a feed shuttle approaching our main hangar bay, the officer exclaimed. Have defenders ready to meet the intruders. Diffit ordered. Heavy weapons are allowed. It is likely they sent competent fighters. Maybe the shuttle has explosives? Offered the engineer. They wouldn't use a shuttle when they could easily strike us with a torpedo or tear into us with railgun strikes. No, my kin, they are trying to board us. To send a small force only means that they are sending their best. Gazer, I want footage of the hangar now. At its command, a holoscreen appeared in front of it displaying his requested area. It saw 100 defenders and several dozen trainees fully suited, carrying heavy laser and short-range plasma weapons set upon defensive positions. Before more defenders could arrive, however, the shuttle entered the hangar unleashing a barrage of kinetic rounds from previously concealed turret compartments. The defenders and the trainees opened fire, flaring the shields of the shuttle with only a few plasma bolts punching through, melting armor and wreaking havoc with the internal electronics. Many kin were butchered by the two turrets until they stopped firing. Then, suddenly, a section of the shuttle exploded, and 12 figures emerged with the use of jetpacks. The armored humans, lowly feed that they were, would be slaughtered within moments. Except it didn't happen. Some shots landed on them, flaring their personal shields, but almost faster than its eyes could follow, they were upon its siblings. The expected slaughter happened, but unleashed upon Drazan, not feed. It was anti-natural to see nearly 300 siblings cut down with terrifying ease, and not a single human had fallen. Sparing a second amongst each other, Diffit watched with horror how they split into groups of 3 and then rushed out in different directions. "Give me visuals on all of them!" it ordered, and the holoscreen widened, splitting itself into several different video feeds. 2 groups were running down corridors, gutting and killing any kin that dared confront them. It didn't matter if they were defenders, caretakers, or simple trainees. They slaughtered them all without mercy, and often before the kin could return fire. They used pistols, rifles, and terrible energy swords with the same deadly efficiency. On the bridge watched in horror how mere juvenile kin, brave ones who refused to leave their stations for the sanctuary deeper within the ship, were torn to shreds mercilessly, their remains adorning the floors without care. "Woo! Why aren't the automated defenses working?" the engineer cried, flailing widely as it did. "They have not reached them yet. What is the feed doing, officer?" Diffit asked, his attention stolen back to the hangar where 6 more of those deadly figures emerged bearing similar weaponry. Behind them, though, a figure wearing red armor from top to bottom stepped out. Just seeing this feed, this human thing through the camera, sent a tremor of pure fear up its stalk and caused its hearts to skip several beats one after the other. "High Marshal, the feed! They are accessing a console! They're invading our networks!" The officer replied in a panic, tapping on its panel for several seconds before frustratingly punching it several times. "Viruses are flooding our servers. Ghost AIs are hijacking and rewriting our command protocols, blocking access to several ship systems. They're destroying our assistant AIs one by one in mere seconds. Automated defenses have been deactivated. Trigger motion traps and automated traps have been deactivated. Security cameras are functional. Life support is being cut off from all living quarters. Entire decks and bulkheads are being sealed off. We've managed to isolate the bridge and the grazing grounds. That shouldn't be possible. Humans don't know our protocols, our systems," Diffit replied. Anger replaced fear and confusion turned into indignation. "Order our forces to avoid engaging the human feed. Set perimeters around the nurseries and the cattle pens. Protocol rotting tomb is in effect. Engineer, can we overload our reactors?" "We can't. The humans have disabled it," the engineer replied in a panic. High Marshal Diffit was backed into a wall. There was nothing more that it could do, and it knew it. The humans had crippled them, and they were set on a desperate defense of their home and promise of the future, a future that now looked bleak and unreachable. As High Marshal, it could order every kin except for the caretakers to face the invaders. But that would just mean it'd sacrifice them for mere seconds of delay before they reached the more populated areas. For now, its greatest aim was to rescue siblings trapped on isolated decks with hampered life support. "Send engineers and defenders as their vanguard with breaching equipment. Liberate as much of our kin as possible," Diffit commanded, desperately struggling to keep any semblance of confidence and security, however fake it was. "High Marshal, they're avoiding targeting the video and recording systems on purpose," the officer said, veins trembling erratically. Monsters! While Drazan lacked vocal cords, the high-pitched hiss that escaped its mouth as its tongue lashed out was charged with all the hatred it could muster. They want us to watch our demise. Seal the bridge and everyone prepare. They'll make their way here eventually. Let us offer prayers to Drazkalak and eradicate these human beasts from our home. Diffit watched as every kin was quick to take up arms and suit up, ready to give their lives if need be for the survival and supremacy of all Drazan. With that said, it turned back to the holoscreen to see the progress of the humans. To its surprise, they had halted their reckless advance and were now securing the terrain already gained. The hangar and 4 entire decks were now theirs. Virtually nothing on a ship the size of the Eternal Garden, but the speed and ruthlessness in which they had taken it was to be feared. For what felt like an eternity, Diffit could only watch as the armored humans, led by that terrifying Red One, waited for something. High Marshal, we've lost all communications with the Lord Harrower and the rest of our kin. Sensors also detect 6 shuttles incoming. Another group of 4 is following behind, the officer announced. Diffit didn't reply. It could only watch with impotency as 6 additional shuttles landed on their hangar, sullying it with their filthy human boots. Scores of humans discharged the shuttles, and the difference between the new arrivals and the first wave of attackers was more than evident. Some wore quality armor and weapons, and most were dressed in inferior but sustainable equipment, mass-produced and functional, but nothing impressive. The shuttles departed, and a minute later the 4 additional shuttles landed, discharging a more ramshackle group of humans equipped with varying grades of quality. The High Marshal watched carefully, seeing them form into groups and receiving orders before they broke off, and the incursion into the Eternal Garden began. "Which zone will be reached first?" it asked. "That group," it began, highlighting the party of 5 humans led by the red-armored one, "will reach the cattle pens if they continue on their way. High Marshal, they move as if they know where they are going. I fear they have stolen the Eternal Garden's schematics and layout." "Obviously," Diffit replied bitterly, not against its sibling but directed at the human feed. "Inform our siblings that the humans are coming. Ready the cattle shields." On the screen, the perspective changed to show large areas dotted with pens where cattle could be held, sapient and not. Defenders and skinners were coordinating the defensive preparations, stacking metallic crates and other objects to create barricades, forming a kill zone that lined up with the main entrance. Juvenile cattle, children if it remembered correctly, were being taken out from their pens. Some protested or cried, others obeyed obediently. The loss of precious future breeding cattle would be tragic, but feed was feed, and if feed could buy them an advantage over the lowly humans, then it didn't matter. Once the defenses were set as best they could, with kin holding the children in front of them as shields, while their own weapons were aimed and ready, the group led by the red-armored human was less than 30 seconds away. On the screen, Diffit saw the red-armored human arm itself with a handgun in one hand and a dull-looking sword in the other. Before it could process what was happening, a glow of green energy surrounded the sword, and the human began to distort right in front of its eyes. Then, it happened. In a rush of speed that surprised everyone watching it, the red-armored human erupted past the entrance, sprinting at a speed that shouldn't have been possible. The first line of defenders opened fire with laser, heavy laser, and plasma rifles, but the human weaved and moved so fast and so erratically that nearly every shot failed to hit its intended mark. Almost too fast for its eyes to follow, the red-armored human closed the distance, and with a swing of its sword, 3 defenders alongside their shields were cut down as if they were made out of paper. Diffit watched in horror as the human jumped and moved with unmatched agility, cutting down kin after kin with laughable ease. It fired its gun several times, each time claiming the life of yet another kin. The momentum and the speed it carried from its earlier run proved to be nothing more than another tool it could use to deliver death upon innocent Drazan. 2 skinners confronted the human, their vines already flailing, ready to pierce, gut, and tear the human apart. The human answered the challenge by confronting them at the same time the other 4 armored humans reached the defensive line, swords ignited and proceeding to butcher kin and their shields mercilessly. The red-armored human easily dodged the Skinner's attacks, and the battle, if it could be called that, lasted for no more than 5 seconds before the human bisected one of the Skinners with a swift slash while punching the other, tearing its body in half from the force of the impact at the same time. The human stopped for a moment, reached out with its right arm to the side, and caught the handgun that it had at some point launched into the air. Diffit could only watch in horror as the rest of the kin there were slaughtered in mere seconds by the 5 humans. Most of the shields had also perished, but the humans paid them no mind nor care. They simply left them there as they proceeded to continue on their way. In less than a minute, 200 kin had lost their lives to 5 measly humans, although Diffit had to admit they were clearly no ordinary humans. Royal Marines, it finally said. There were only reports and distant rumors from other raiding parties in the past mentioning incredibly skilled and dangerous humans that far surpassed any other fighting feed. It had never considered such reports to be more than exaggerations, but now that it was seeing it with its own eyes, the reality of their situation shook it to the core. The other groups of humans moved swiftly, spearheaded by the armored ones that couldn't be anything but Royal Marines. Each time they entered an area, the Royal Marines would cause mayhem and panic, allowing the other humans following behind them to finish off the survivors. This went on for nearly half an hour, with more and more ground gained and subjugated by the damn humans. When they reached the large grazing grounds at the center of the Eternal Garden, they all halted. The vast farming lands, complete with floral and fungal forests, running water, and a controlled climate filled with docile, tamed, non-sapient cattle, was something they were clearly not expecting to find. Their momentary moment of doubt ended quickly as the Royal Marines reacted first, when several of those accursed invaders suddenly dropped to the ground, either dead or heavily wounded, taken down by the precise shots of hunters. The humans spread out, with the ones wearing the better equipment at the center of formations, while the rest protected them. Their weaker shields often proved to be easily pierced by a single plasma or focused laser shot. From concealed positions, defenders and skinners jumped out, lashing out against the invaders. The regular humans, as expected, hesitated to harm the living shields carried by proud Drazen warriors. Many more fell due to that moment's hesitation, but that only spurred them to fight back, uncaring of harming the living meat shields. Diffit cursed internally when kin after kin were brought down. Some claimed the life of a human or two, but they were badly outnumbered everywhere and thoroughly outmatched at every turn the Royal Marines were present. Frustratingly, the ramshackle group was performing better than the other humans, taking only scant casualties while focusing fire on a single objective in smaller groups at a time. Unlike their better-equipped counterparts, they didn't hesitate to sacrifice the shields if it meant killing one more of its siblings. "Animals! They are perverted animals," Diffit said as the battle continued. "High Marshal, the Red One," the officer warned, panic clear in its shifting colors. Diffit's attention focused on the red-armored human. It had stopped at an intersection along the other 4. While it couldn't know what they were discussing, it soon became apparent as the 4 Royal Marines split into 2 groups, running to each side of the intersection to spread out their slaughter. Meanwhile, the red-armored human continued on forward, heading directly to the bridge. "Form up! Form up!" Diffit commanded, quickly checking its weapons. Every kin followed suit, every weapon pointed at the blast door, keeping the bridge isolated. 2 heavy security turrets were manually overridden and operated by 2 defenders. The holoscreen suddenly died a second alter. "Report! I don't know. The security cameras died at the same time all over the Eternal Garden," the officer answered, agitated. Had they planned this? Had they allowed them to witness the invasion of their home just to blind them at the end? Just how cruel could these unfeeling animals be? Those questions crossed Diffit's mind moments before something powerful hit the blast door. Another hit followed, and then another and another, each time making most of them flinch and take a step back in pure fear. Then it stopped, and silence reigned with only the shuffling noises of clawed paws breaking through every now and again. Without warning, the doors suddenly opened, just enough to allow a young human to pass through. No order was needed to be given. Every weapon, from vine-mounted lasers to plasma rifles and the defense turrets, unleashed their fury on the tight entryway. Scorch marks were formed upon the floor and the doors. Plasma shots, sometimes missed, hitting instead a console or another piece of equipment that destroyed it, often with explosive consequences and initiating a fire that quickly spread. The concentrated barrage of laser and plasma was so intense that the floor near the entrance started to glow brightly and melt, but only leaving brief, bright marks on the reinforced blast doors. Through the continuous fire, however, the body, or rather, what remained of it, of a kin, flew past the suppressing screen. Everyone stopped firing, long enough for them to see in horror the wriggling but still alive kin bereft of its vines, eye stalk, legs, and 3 arms. The pain it was going through had to be unimaginable, and rage filled Diffit's hearts. But too late it realized their mistake. It had been a mere moment of hesitation, but that was all the red-armored human needed. In an agile move, it entered the bridge. Then, before any could resume shooting at the red monster, it leaped forth gracefully, sword ignited on its left hand while the right shot 3 times, ending the lives of 3 siblings. "Open fire!" Diffit ordered, any semblance of self-control and calm erased from its mind. The human landed, killing 2 more kin with the swing of its sword, only to then move incredibly fast to its right, cutting through one of the turrets. It leaped back a dozen meters a second before the turret exploded, killing every sibling near it. The human landed on an engineer a moment later, crushing it instantly. Its shields flared when a plasma bolt hit it, but in return, the glow around the sword ended, and it tossed it at the kin responsible for the attack. The sword pierced straight through its head, impaling another kin in the process to a console. The human then impossibly began to jump, weave, and run with exceptional mobility, crouching so close to the ground that it could fuse with it or bending its body in ways Diffit had never seen another human move before. A defender charged forth, but the human spun around, jumped above it, and then delivered a kick as it descended that turned the 2.5 meters tall Drazen into a bloody mess of blood, organs, and shattered limbs. 6 more shots followed, and 4 kin died mercifully quickly. The human retrieved the sword, igniting it again before launching itself at the other turret, but instead of cutting it like the previous one, it opted to simply kill the defender operating it before lunging to its left, grabbing the kin's eye stalk, shattering the reinforced protective glass as if it wasn't even there and crushing the stalk in a tight grip. It then tossed the kin around with such strength and speed that the engineer that was tackled by the body was smeared on its console, killing them both. In a desperate move, the officer attacked with all vines, its shifting colors showing just how terrified it was. The human didn't bother to dodge its attacks, for only 3 landed hitting its armor without showing any effect, before a swift, powerful kick ripped the officer into 3 separate pieces, smearing its console in the process. "Not feed," Diffit said, activating its translator as it stood in front of the red-armored human looking at him firmly through the glowing green visor it was using. Behind it, the fires danced violently, as if trying to render tribute and praise upon the one who had caused such slaughter. It was then and only then that Diffit realized that it was the only one left alive. "Not feed. You, human. You are a demon." Wordlessly, the red-armored demon raised its sword. The strike was so fast that Diffit didn't register it until a short-lived flash of pain coursed through its body. It felt itself falling to the right and to the left at the same time, and before it could hit the ground, darkness overtook it. Cynthia Winfield deactivated her sword and holstered her gun. Sheathing her sword, she opened a link with Redford. "This is Cynthia Winfield, Commander Redford. The cattle ship has been captured. Our forces are dealing with the remaining stragglers." "Understood. Good hunting, Cynthia," Redford replied, killing the link. Cynthia allowed herself to sigh and roll her left shoulder before looking around at the carnage with nothing but apathy. "Disgusting creatures," she said with poison coating each word. A sudden thought struck her and she knelt down, picking up one of the twitching, claw-tipped vines of the Drazen. She then tore it away, examining it for a few seconds before repeating the process a few times until she had 24, storing them in one of her utility pouches. Making her way to the main console, wires came out of her bracers, connecting with the ship more directly. "Let's see what secrets are you hiding,"